I take this very seriously is the manipulation of reality by the media. It has been one of the most evil things I've ever seen in my life. And you know what? It all kind of started with Gamergate, to where you had a large subsection of the population really changing how they viewed media coverage and media manipulation. They're not journalists, they're all activists. We saw it nonstop, flip flops in the pandemic, the BLM, the this, that, and they just kind of move on when they're exposed and like nothing happened. So, this alternative media reality that we live in now, you get some crazies that get pretty prominent out there, but the best thing to do is to expose everything, expose everybody to every idea, and just let them decide for themselves. What's up, everybody? Welcome back to class. Hope you all liked the new intro. I was working on that for a little bit yesterday. I think it came out pretty good. Slowly but surely, we're getting to be a real podcast. Today, we're going to go back in time a little bit. We're going to talk about what I think is actually one of the most important, like, cultural events in the last 15 years. Probably something that honestly not many of you have even heard about. It had to be kind of like online and in the whole internet culture to even really know about it much. But you might have heard it's called Gamergate, and it was actually a monumental shift into the way that we view the media, and just a kind of a glimpse into the manipulation that they pull on us. So yeah, today we're going to do a little bit of a deep dive on that. It was from 2014 is when it first started. And maybe you heard like it was a harassment campaign. And it was like all these toxic gamers and this and that, but it really, there's a lot more to it than that. Um, it kind of started as like a personal drama, like a relationship, and just exploded into this whole big thing that was covered on, all the major news outlets, CNN, Fox, New York Times. I think he wrote about it. A lot of them. And, they didn't kind of exposed how they don't really report the news. They'll manufacture and, manipulate wording and stories to push their narrative of what they choose for you to know. And, it started with video games, but it really wasn't about that. And it was really, like the first time that a large group of people like pierced the veil and was able to see the inner workings a little bit of the media machine and everything that they do behind the scenes, to rig basically our worldview, our reality. So yeah, we're gonna get into the story, go by step. We're gonna go over a few of those exact tricks that they use to manipulate everything. And after that, we're going to probably get into a little bit of, you know, other places that they use these same tricks, where it was, if you saw this happen in real time, Gamergate, then you saw it happening again and again, and you'll be able to tell next time they start it. Uh, so let's just kind of get into it, settle in and stick around for the story. It was August in 2014. Video games were exploding. It was the biggest industry. It was bigger than Hollywood, bigger than movies. Everybody wanted to get into gaming and this and that. And that's really when it pretty much blew up, all the streaming, all the Twitch and all that. Everybody was pretty much playing, like Call of Duty and those shooters, or they're playing online, like role playing games. And there were a few of these weird indie titles, independents that people played. Like, few of them got huge, and then it was there. it- What video games are supposed to be. It was there for fun, to relax. You come home and you play a game, you shoot some zombies or whatever it is, and that's it. But that's also about the same time as the whole social justice and the woke culture, all that began exploding and trying to leach its way into everything in our society. Um, so the main person that, like, the ground zero of this story basically is a girl named Zoe Quinn. And she was like an independent and indie developer who put out this free text game that was called Depression Quest. It was about living with depression. Um, it got some hype a little bit, I guess, in, like, again, the woke area of gaming culture. It wasn't a huge thing, but she was in a relationship with a software developer, a guy named Aran Joni. Um, they typical, on again, off again, fighting, this, that. Finally, it actually blew up uh, August 16th in 2014. And uh, Iran dropped like this whole 9,000 page blog post, uh, called it the Zoe post. And it's just, typical emotional, oh, look what she did, this and that, but it had chat logs and timelines and pictures, screenshots, all this, accusing her of emotional manipulation, lying, cheating. One of the people that she did cheat with was a journalist for, at the time, the largest video, like, gaming website was Kotaku. And she was cheating on him with a guy named Nathan Grayson who worked for that site. And again, it just looked like some breakup drama that you'd find on Facebook back in the day. You'd just read it for entertainment and move on with your life. But in the gaming community, they saw it and saw a lot of, like, red flags in there. Basically, like I said, the woke culture, the social justice stuff was leaching into gaming to where, like, all these games of the year awards, all these ratings, all the critic sites and everything, like, all these games that were, woke. There's no other way to really describe them. It's the handicapped black lesbian is, saving the day against modern day Nazis who just look like the typical white American kid, that just doesn't want to be forced to say that he was racist because he was born white. But, and so, like, there was already like a culture of, like, why is this so popular? Nobody could really understand it, but it was like, well, I guess somebody has to like it. But then when this whole thing came out, there was a lot of, it was like, seeing, like, little red flags everywhere. Like, oh, hey, yeah, so she's getting, he actually, the guy that she was cheating with never reviewed her game, but he did mention her in passing. And, kind of just like you saw a theme with all of it. There was undisclosed friendships, there was Patreon support for all these developers. And, like, you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours. So, you know, this person's little pet project got great reviews from this other site, and then this other site, then, got great reviews from them. Like, actually, then a whole mailing list got leaked later on down the road, but it was called Game Journal Pros. And it showed, like, journalists who were just coordinating all of their stories, and any critics that didn't follow along with their agenda were blacklisted from all of these sites, not able to give their critiques. Um, it wasn't really about like one specific review about a specific game or anything. It was just like the kind of like opening of their eyes to the culture of, yeah, artificial success of all these games. Um, and like, it was became basically the press became like gatekeepers. You can't, I got to get used to this stupid thing. You can't find success now unless you kiss the ring of the game journalists and all these websites, because then your game doesn't get promoted and you don't sell. So that was August 16th. And then by August 27th, actually, the actor, Adam Baldwin, tweeted some YouTube breakdowns of what was going on in the early days. And he used the hashtag back when hashtags were huge. It was Gamergate after the Watergate. Now everything is gate now. But yeah, it kind of just exploded from there. Like, people were demanding disclosures from all these sites, and like, any sponsorships, anything like that. And then there was the backlash to that. Well, at first, also you had like, you had women, and you had uh, minorities, gamers, and stuff who supposedly, like, oh, they were protecting them, but like they started the hashtag. It's called "Not Your Shield." So like, yeah, don't use us to push your agenda. Basically, like, don't say, like, don't use us. Oh, we're just protecting them, so that you don't get criticized for what you were doing. Um, and looking back, it was just like, finally the people were waking up to the cronyism, the manipulation, all that. And media tried to bury it immediately. So, they tried to turn this backlash against, artificial awards and all of these things, like the consumer advocacy, basically. Like, we want uh, the truth. We want real reporting on this stuff. And they turned it into, they're evil. They're bad people. They're misogynists. They're sexist. They're racist. They're, the same thing that we've heard again and again. So, it kind of crazy how like a breakup post is really what sparked this whole thing. But, overnight, almost immediately, we spoke about that mailing list, the coordinated articles and stuff, and immediately, in late August of 2014, a wave of just all these like identical articles just came out, on all the sites, all the magazines, everywhere. Uh, and to be fair, there were some like serious harassment going on against a lot of the women who were fighting back, who were writing these articles and stuff. And then the girl Zoe Quinn as well. They were getting doxxed. They were getting, I think, this one girl, Brianna Wu, got swatted. They got some threats, and like, there was uh, some serious, what's the word I'm looking for? Bad behavior, I guess, towards these women. Mostly they came from like 4chan and 8chan, and like the real vile websites that nobody decent has any business really going on. And you get some crazy stuff from there, and a couple of things are interesting, but those forum sites are just full of, you know, the worst aspects of an internet culture, we'll say. Uh, but even the regular people who were actually going up just against the media coverage and that and the bias were got harassed and they got doxxed, and they also tried to keep those bad actors on their side out of it. They wouldn't when they would show up on the regular forums like Reddit or wherever, it would be like, no, 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 you got to stop talking. Like we're not doing this just to go at people for no reason. Like this is a serious issue that we want to address in the right way. But that side gets ignored, and all the bad actors get amplified in the media. Uh, they did though get Intel to pull their ads from one of the sites, Game of Sutra. So there was a serious pushback against it, and it looked, looking back on it, it was a victory in the culture war. And that's one of the biggest things in the culture war itself was Gamergate, because you had a whole group of just, regular everyday people that, they didn't do anything. They weren't really out for anybody. They just wanted to play the games that they enjoyed without being force fed all of these BS narratives. So, and that's where a lot of the resentment came from. I always use the example of in Avengers Endgame, right? Like where the force feeding. So if you remember at the end, the final battle scene, everybody's kind of scattered all over the battlefield, and Spider-Man is trying to get the gauntlet to where, I forget where. I think into the van or something, into the time machine, yeah. And then all of a sudden, like, Captain Marvel comes and he's like, "Oh, how are you gonna do it?" And then like all the female heroes just like magically appear right next to her, like, "Oh, we'll help her." And it was just like, come on, like, eh, admittedly, by the time this Black Widow movie did come out, I was done with Avengers because again, it was just all of this force-fed crap. But literally since the first Avengers movie, I was like, yo, I really want a Black Widow movie. Like, I really want her origin. Like, it's so cool. It's a great story. I want to see, like, so it's not about the female superhero. It's not against it. It's the force feeding, just again, artificial. It just doesn't feel right. So that's kind of like the same thing. Uh, but it really exposed, like I said, the how the media actually operates. They don't report the news; they create reality, and they did that again with these hit jobs. We'll get into a couple of the specific examples. There's Lee Alexander at Gama Sutra, the site that Intel pulled their ads from, and a quote from her article is, "Gamers don't have to be your audience. Gamers are over." Like, yeah. She calls gaming culture embarrassing. It's not even culture. Uh, sh- it just kept going on and on. She called them, quote, obtuse shit slingers who don't know how to dress or behave. So you're on a gaming website and you're describing your audience that in such a way. Like, can you have any more contempt for them? Uh, Basically, she said, "Oh, ditch the old audience because it's dead." All these gamer guys, gamer bros. The people that now everywhere on Instagram you just see talk. Everybody talks about these Call of Duty, you know, the lobbies and all of that. Like, yeah, that was gamer bros, and it's basically like, "Oh no, forget them. We don't have to cater to them at all. We, just go to the woke." Uh, and none of them mentioned all the conflicts of interests, all the ethics questions of, all of these behind the scenes deals. The mailing lists, the game journals pros, like no mention of that at all. And it's just, the arrogance, and like, if anybody remembers how it was, like, I'm sure a lot of people like that are going to watch this were wrapped up in that woke culture and in that time, because it was basically all around it. there were within a few days, between August 28th and August 30th, there was 5 pieces put out. Like, here's the hang on, let me see. Kotaku uh, put out an article by Luke Plunkett. He said, quote, "We might be witnessing the death of an identity. There's been so much hate over what? Video games?" Again, it wasn't about video games. It was about the manipulation of reality. Polygon was another site. Chris Plant called gamers pouting like an obstinate child while the industry opened its arms to diversity. Yeah, the same talking points that you hear again and again in all of these different places, um, put out just one right after the other, coordinated. That's how they operate. Anything they were just criticizing the ethics of the journalists, and that just gets turned into the obstinate children. Their gamers are dead. They're uh, the death of an identity. All that, like, come on. Then it got into the more mainstream, like Vox, and there was a place. I'm not sure if it was a site or printed, but Ars Technica declared the whole movement, the whole Gamergate movement, no, it's debunked. Oh no, this is all fake. This is just misogynist gamer bros just going at the women developers because they hate women. They never touched on the Patreon support, the back scratching, the mailing list, the coordinated articles. And again, these websites after did change their disclosure policy. Like, the Gamergate bros did win. Uh, but they did their best. They did exactly like how they do with everything else. It's like it's binary. It's either your ethics or you're either criticizing ethics or you're harassment. Like, it's either like, no, we were all good and we're just going after the journalists, or it was all harassment, and like that's all they wanted to do. Like, the threats, all, like we said, the legitimate threats and all these stuff that should be shunned and should be condemned. The people who did that don't deserve to be part of it, but those were amplified. Again, it did happen both ways. And the threats and the, doxing of the people who were legitimately criticizing the ethics of the gaming industry were, none of those were talked about in these articles. They got buried. And, so it's kind of a way of getting everybody against a movement. So you pick the worst aspects of a movement, because any movement is going to have the worst aspects of it. And you amplify those, put it on the front page so everybody sees it. So then anybody involved in it is just, nobody wants to touch that. They become toxic. And, they do this again and again and again. It shuts down legitimate movements and legitimate criticisms of any sort of aspect of our lives. Again, like, all of my episodes, you see me, I go at Israel hard because I think what they do is unethical. It has nothing to do with the Jewish dentist down the street or the average everyday Jewish person. Grew up in Long Island, New York. Got family all over Brooklyn. That's almost as Jewish as Tel Aviv. I got nothing against the average everyday Jewish person. I got something against Israel and how that nation operates. But they always try to lump any criticism of Israel in with the anti-Semites and the neo-Nazis, who they're meaningless people. Like, nobody cares about them. But they'll amplify those, which actually we'll see. in my conclusion. That's a little foreshadow, a little teaser for you. But they amplify those, and so that everybody can lumped in with that. Yeah. Anyway, getting back to it, it did seriously backfire on the media. Actually, like this is one of the worst things that could have happened to the media itself because it exposed just how they do it. Like everybody, all these gamers, like all these people watched it in real time. Like they knew, and like it's hard to describe how like the gaming culture itself was insulated from these media attacks because they have their like we were talking about their Call of Duty lobbies, and then like on PC gaming. I think back then it was probably TeamSpeak. Now the big thing is Discord. So like you had these large groups of people who played all these games like together, thousands and thousands and millions of people who were able to be in their own like kind of ecosystem and see and talk about these issues and see that 95 to 98% of the people were talking about the problem of the ethics in journalism, and in the all you saw on the media coverage was just nothing but the worst aspects of it and honestly lies of it. So you had all these millions of people like watch it happen in real time and then all kind of explained it to their friends. So it would, like I said, just pierce that veil just a little bit, to kind of like pull back the curtain just enough to see how the machine actually operates. And a lot of those people then looked at other events in history and they started recognizing the pattern, just saw it on repeat again and again and again. And eventually now nobody believes the media, you know, we're going to, let's, some other examples, like we were saying, is COVID. I mean, how stupid was it that the lab leak theory for years, at least 2 years of COVID, the lab leak theory was considered a racist and like you couldn't say that. You'd be kicked off of YouTube. You'd be kicked off of all these places on Twitter. You'd have your accounts revoked, Facebook, all of this for saying that you believe that the coronavirus, which was worse and much more, uh, what's the word I'm looking for? Oh my God. Contagious. There you go. Extremely contagious and at first somewhat deadly coronavirus probably came from the Wuhan Institute of Coronavirus or Coronavirus Lab when the first outbreak was in Wuhan, China. You were called racist for assuming that. All the experts just came and just beat anybody who said that down. And now we know that it did come from the lab. Has anybody said anything? Has anybody corrected it? Has anybody apologized for removing these videos? Or these posts? No, they didn't. They just move on. You had Fauci in the beginning. No, masks don't work. No, they don't work for the public. We've already tested this. They don't, And then overnight, masks are mandatory. Double mask. You should double mask. You can also use a cloth mask. You can use a bandana, but you have to put a mask on. That was, me personally, I am a contrarian at heart. Whatever most people are saying or liking, I tend to not. It's just in my nature. It's a flaw a lot of the times, I'll be honest, but it also kind of helps me a lot. So, like, I saw that for what that was just nothing but like a compliance check. Now, if you read anything at the time, masks didn't protect you from catching it. I mean, you had the K95s that would help, but masks, like the surgical masks that everybody started wearing, like all they would really do was like if you were sick, your spread wasn't as far. Like it would stop a lot of the water droplets but it would, you would still be contagious, but it would kind of like, dampen it a little bit. It would not stop anything from coming in if you were wearing it. Everybody knew that already. And then cloth masks, they were on national TV showing us how to make cloth masks. Cloth doesn't do a thing. And we were told to wear two. Like, that's when I was like, all right, this isn't up. This ain't real. But, again, it was a compliance check. And like, listen, I wasn't really yeah, you saw those people who were like yelling at the 17-year-old girl in the front of Costco or Sam's Club or wherever, like, no, I will not put on a mask. Like, listen, I'm not going to make anybody's life harder. I throw the mask on if I have to. If anybody says anything, oh, yeah, okay. But I'm not here to make everyday people's lives a mess. But I knew it was theater, it was show. Actually, when I came back to New York, I also, at the time, I was living in North Carolina, and it was pretty much Trump country over there. So, like, eh, nobody really took those things seriously. But then when I came back to New York, it was a little bit taken more serious. And Hochul reinstated the mask order, I think in the end of summer of 21 or something like that. And like, I told my boss at the time, it was like, oh, yeah, no, we have to tell people to put on a mask. I was like, listen, I'll wear the mask. I'll do whatever. I will not tell anybody what to do. It just goes against everything in my core beliefs to tell somebody what to do with their body. I won't. And like, he knows me well. And like, it's just one of those things that I just will not do. I'd rather just stay home and go broke than force somebody to do something against their will. Um, getting back into it, school closures and lockdowns, they were all non-negotiable. You want these kids to die, and you want grandma to die, and this and that. Uh, the I, I have a post every year. You get the Facebook memories where I, it was early, maybe June of 2020, where I was like, at what point does the economic impact of these lockdowns, you know, supersede the impact of the virus itself? And I laugh at these comments every year that I got because it was just like, oh, all the worst names in the world I was called. It won't matter when everybody is dead. And how could you care about money and this and that, blah, blah, blah. It was just like, okay. And now every year I just look back and I laugh. That's, a little bit of my own patting myself on the back. But, like natural immunity was another thing, huge thing. Like if you had it, you still had to get vaccinated. Didn't matter about the side effects that we all saw from the vaccines. No, you had to get vaccinated. But I have the antibodies. Why do I need it? No. You have to, because again, it was just about compliance and not about oh, you were anti-science. No, you were just anti-compliant. Yeah, and there's those videos. If you get the vaccine, you will not catch COVID. If you get the vaccine, I know it was Rachel Maddow. Oh, she had a thing. If you get the vaccine and a person with COVID transfers it to you, it stops. It ends right there because you can't catch it and you can't give it to anybody. And overnight, we just saw. Oh, well, no, but it wasn't supposed to stop it. it was just meant to lessen the symptoms. And it's like, what? That's not a vaccine. And then Oxford Dictionary changed the definition of vaccines. That happened in 2020. 21 actually. I'm sorry. 2021, Oxford Dictionary changed the definition of a vaccine to fit with the new COVID vaccine. That's how far this stuff goes. The manipulation of reality. So now when you go and you look at and like, uh, I would tell people that's not a vaccine, and a vaccine inoculates you from this. No, look at this. The dictionary definition, blah blah blah. Like, yes, they changed reality as we know it. Yeah, I constantly bring him up because I love him. But Dave Smith had a thing. I think he was on a PBD podcast, like a special episode. Patrick Bet David. This was years ago, but where he talks about, you look at the Nexus charts from like 2012 and racism, sexism, homophobia, transphobia, all of these words, you look at their use in the media in like big print, like, New York Times, Washington Post, like all the big media outlets. And those words just skyrocket after 2012. Like nobody was saying it before then. And then all of a sudden, boom, it just skyrockets. And that's all anybody could talk about then. And then we've got all these BLM riots. Like, and again, you look back, that was all manufactured. I talk about like when I was a kid in the 90s and early 2000s, Valley Stream, Long Island. My high school my graduating class was maybe 65% maybe white. It was majority white. But there was, like probably 15% black, 10, 12, or, you know, 10 to 15% Spanish, and then the rest Asian. So like it was a group of everybody. And racism wasn't a thing. Like we would joke about it. Like I remember like you would make stupid jokes like, you'd have like a group of like the black kids, kind of like hanging out in the hallway, and it'd be like, "Oh, you better move. A white man's walking through here." Like, and everybody would laugh. And then it'd be like, "Yo, shut up, white boy," blah, blah, blah. Like, because it didn't matter. And then all of a sudden, after 2012, like, no, you can't joke about that stuff anymore. It's, there's such a past in this country, but we were past it already. It was manipulated to become a thing again. Like I said, we talk about the BLM riots. Literally, cities burnt down. $2 billion worth of damages. There was dozens of people dead, businesses destroyed, never opened up again. and, and CNN gets it the worst from this because on the bottom of their screen, they had the little chyron. It said, quote, "fiery but mostly peaceful protests." And behind the guy, you see buildings just burning, just inferno behind him. It was, again, that was another of just like, oh, just piercing the veil. And we see right into it now. Again, they had in Seattle, you had the Chaz. I forget what it's, something autonomous zone. But it was like basically like they shut down this whole area of the city and nobody could go in, and like they wouldn't let police in, and like they got taken over by basically like a warlord. People lived there. There were apartments in there, and like they were held hostage for a few weeks. You look at all the Antifa violence, like, oh, you still hear it now. They still try to say it is that, the biggest threat to America is right-wing violence. But like, you looked at Antifa and those groups, like they were firebombing buildings. They burnt down the police department in Minneapolis. They were bringing weapons and, guns to Portland and all these people like that. I mean, the little communist wimps, basically. Like there was a few videos that if you get the chance, just go back and watch because they're so funny. There's like there was the one guy with the frying pan, and he just starts taking them out with like a frying pan. And then there's like another one where the like they're in the street. I think it was Portland, and like it was Proud Boys and versus like Antifa, and like this one guy starts like pushing people, and you see somebody like one of the Antifa guys come with like a bat or like a metal pipe or something to try to hit this guy. This guy just catches it and just whew, rocks him. Like his glasses come flying off. Like they have it in slow motion. It was hilarious. But uh, just thinking about those again, those are funny. But then you had when the whole thing happened in where was it? Was it Waukesha, Illinois, with Kyle Rittenhouse? That which again, yeah, I go back and I get those Facebook memories because I posted about it almost immediately. Yeah, that was self defense. Anybody with a brain knew it was self defense. You could just see it. Um, but he was painted as a white supremacist and who only killed white people. By the way, he shot 3 people. All 3 of them were white, but he was a white supremacist racist. Um, that was just going hunting. That was the narrative that they painted. And you can go back even further. You can look at all the war propaganda over the years. Looked at the Iraq, the WMDs, and have all of these. They would just basically like New York Times reported that this person said this, and then the Washington Post says as reported by the New York Times, and the next person as reported by the Washington Post and the New York Times, and it just kind of they have a web of legitimacy just because they cite each other without ever citing a real source. So, or there might be like one like anonymous source that kind of like was vague about something, and then they explode from there, and they gain legitimacy by citing each other. Yeah, and then the smears, personal hero of mine. The biggest impact on my political beliefs, Ron Paul, for decades was smeared as unpatriotic, an isolationist, all of this and that, terrorist sympathizer, because he just wanted to bring the troops home. He said we shouldn't be going to war. And all the media just they they left him off of polls in the 2012 election. Like anytime he was doing good in the polls, they would just literally not put him on the polls on TV. It'd be like, oh, 2012. So it was Mitt Romney, Ron Paul will be in second, not there. Ted Cruz or whoever else was running at the time. It was like, I don't think it was Rick Santorum, probably. It was just like, and all of them did it. Uh, Again, Russiagate. That's another huge example. Just 3 years of claiming that the president of the United States was a traitor and a foreign spy with no evidence except that they all believed it. Like they all just cited each other. They used a operative for the Hillary Clinton campaign who, his name was, I forget his first name, but it was Steele. It's the Steele dossier, which, the Hillary Clinton campaign had him write up because he worked for like MI6 or some British intelligence. He had worked previously there, and he just wrote up like, oh yeah, no, he's working for Russia. And then everybody just ran with it. My favorite thing of all time was from BuzzFeed News. You could still find the tweet, just Google it. And it was, there may exist a tape of Donald Trump doing something in an elevator. I think it was. I have to go back and look, but I think it was, may exist a tape of Donald Trump doing something in an elevator. What he was doing And whether that tape exists, we don't know. But it's just what? Trump might have done something on an elevator which was caught on tape, but we don't know if that tape exists or what he was doing. That was the headline. Just looking back at those times where like the media really just, I mean, they still do. Don't get me wrong. It's just we have the the one good thing from this election was that the mainstream media is completely dead. Nobody believes him anymore. It doesn't matter who goes on there. Like Mark Levin is on Fox News, and he's like their primetime guy or Sunday night guy. Like, who cares what he has to say? The mainstream media is dead. I can't tell you a person on CNN anymore. MSNBC, no idea. These places are dead. And that's the best thing that came out of this past election. I'm kind of rambling on because this is serious. Yeah, I take this very seriously. Is the manipulation of reality by the media. It has been one of the most evil things I've ever seen in my life. And you know what? It all kind of started with Gamergate, to where you had a large subsection of the population really changing how they viewed media coverage and media manipulation. They're not active. They're not journalists. They're all activists. We saw it nonstop, flip flops in the pandemic. The BLM, the this, that, and they just kind of move on when they're exposed, and like nothing happened. So this alternative media reality that we live in now, you get some crazies that get pretty prominent out there, but the best thing to do is to expose everything. Expose everybody to every idea and just let them decide for themselves. Because people are smart enough to know. And even if they do start believing, certain bad aspects of this new media narrative, once you see how easily it gets taken down, intellectually by anybody else, it's just like, oh, yeah, okay, that was pretty dumb of me to believe that. And that's it. Sunlight is the best disinfectant. I kind of want to just quote, one of my favorite rappers, his 50 Cent. And he has a line where he says, I hate a liar more than I hate a thief. A thief is after my salary. A liar is after my reality. And I've always loved that line. That's been like one of my favorite lines of his forever. And that was on, I believe, Power of the Dollar, even before Get Rich or Die Trying. Like, he's absolutely right. You could take my money, like, yeah, I'll be mad. But you take my reality from me, that's, that's everything. That's your whole world. And so we teased that earlier where we were talking about, all the worst aspects of society being amplified. And just last week, the Southern Poverty Law Center was charged, uh, was indicted by the Department of Justice, like the one good thing that the DOJ has done on federal fraud charges, of wire fraud, false statements, money laundering. And they actually, during the whole Gamergate thing, labeled it a harassment campaign and a male supremacy. And, the favorite line at the time was the gateway to the alt right. Uh, so just going to go over what the prosecutors say quick. Was between 2014 and 2023, the Southern Poverty Law Center secretly funneled over $3 million to leaders and affiliates of these hate groups that they claimed to be fighting, and then raising donor money off of that to, vowing to dismantle these. So, like, If anybody remembers the Charlottesville protests, it's where Trump got in trouble. More media narrative manipulation. It's just everywhere. Where Trump said there's good people on both sides, and just the manipulation there was, his next line in that was, I'm not talking about the neo Nazis or the white supremacists, because that Charlottesville thing started out as a protest to keep the Robert E. Lee statue in, up in Charlottesville. Whether you think you should or you shouldn't, people look at that as like the heritage of where they're from. Again, I'm not judging the heritage itself, but they're not there doing it because they're white supremacists or racists or neo Nazis. They were there because Charlottesville, Virginia, and Robert E. Lee was from Virginia, and he's looked at as one of the greatest generals in history. So these people wanted this person's statue still there. Nothing about race, nothing about that was ever said from them. But then they got clumped in with these, the tiki torch waving fucking, try not to curse on here, the tiki torch waving protesters, screaming, Jews will not replace us. Turns out they got $300,000 from the Southern Poverty Law Center. Somebody from there got 270,000. Excuse me. I don't want to lie and manipulate on here. The Southern Poverty Law Center gave those tiki torch waving idiots $270,000. Now, the acting attorney general right now, Todd Blanche, said, quote, the SPLC is manufacturing racism to justify its existence. It was not dismantling these groups. It was instead manufacturing the extremism it purports to oppose. This is like the ultimate closed door loop or closed loop. You create a problem, you fund the monster, then you pose as the dragon slayer for money, for fundraising, and for fame. The media did it with Gamergate. They blew up all these fringe idiots that were doxing and threatening people and then saying, "Oh no, we're taking them down." It's what the activists do with these hate groups. They were SPLC was funding the head of the KKK. They were giving him money. We don't need these people. They are a net negative on society. We need open platforms, no censorship, so that all these agendas get exposed immediately for what they are. The Gamergate kind of exposed it in the beginning, and the Southern Poverty Law Center today, it shows that it's still happening. But we have to start looking at the media with a lot more scrutiny as a whole. I do. I don't believe anything I read. I read 4 different things from 4 different perspectives. Something drops. It's who said it? CNN said it. All right, now what's Fox say? Okay, now what's Axios say? All right, now what's this right-wing publication say? And then I'll try to go to like an international, a BBC or an Al Jazeera or something like that. Okay, now we've got every kind of viewpoint on this topic. Now I'm going to make up my mind. Well, that's the show for today. If this is your first time hearing about it, drop your thoughts in the comments. Let me know. Give me a like. Subscribe. It will really help me out. And keep being skeptical. Take care, everybody.